Okay, this is probably good. Welcome to the 2-Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter and 3%, in which we take one book, break it down section by section, talk about it, analyze it, have fun. This season, we have been doing Monsterhuman by Kjersti Skomsvold, which I think we're pronouncing somewhat correctly, but we'll check, because she is here joining us live to talk about Monsterhuman. And I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox.
Good morning, Chad. Good morning, Kjersti.
So are we? Yeah, I hope we're pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, you are. It's very good. Yeah.
It's like, it's fine.
Yeah.
There's the part like today we're going to go over the very end. This is the last episode of this season, and there's a part where you say that you started to like your name when you learned how to pronounce it correctly, and then Hilda made you like the second your Anna's daughter, and then you start to like your last name as well in this chapter. So
yeah, because I had to see a speech therapist to learn how to pronounce my own name.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the first sound is quite difficult for people. Yeah, and then you have a sound that's almost the same, which is s09e10, and that's out here. And then it's back here. So yeah, but no, I like it.
Nice. It's a very nice name. Well, thank you for joining us. Like we've been talking about, I feel like we like you said, Brian, like meeting a celebrity. It's sort of like we feel like I sort of know you because this book feels so personal and so like close to like your mindset while you're writing it. And I wonder if that's like part of that like fallacy, like an authorial fallacy, like we're just pretending this is you and it's nothing. You're like, no, my writing experience is completely different. Or if this was like a very honest assessment of what it was like writing your first book.
I want to be honest, so I hope that it is. And I like books where I sort of feel like I'm inside the writer's brain, but it's not like someone is showing me something. I just get to take copy of it. But there are some differences as well, because a character in a novel is always something else than a human being. And I think it gave me sort of a bit of freedom as well, because everyone looks where I'm pointing at Kjersti, and then I'm sort of free, and they think that, yeah. But of course you know me, in a way. Then that you wouldn't have if you didn't read the books, yeah.
Yeah. There was one line that stood out to me at the end. I'm not sure if I'm going to find it right here, but was where no, I did. That really stood out to me and that seemed to mirror my experience of reading this book is on 427, where it says, "I'm going to write a novel that, by a change in the language, proves that a person can change. There will be a development in the language from a halting, stuttering, strenuous language to a more literary language, prose that smooths out, reads more simply and clearly as glass, so that through my language I will be able to show the development in myself." And that I really like. And that was sort of what, when we started talking about this, like they felt like there was an intentional evolution of like the writing style from section to section and different things that you were doing at different points in time, such as like, I forget where it was, but early on when you talk about changing the novel that you're writing into a third person from first person and how it doesn't work quite so well. And like in Monsterhuman, that section becomes more of a third person section and it gets a little bit further away from like the honesty and directness that makes it so charming. And I think it's a really interesting technique and it was very well done throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
Again, not a question. I suck at this. Like this is like I'm horrible at interviewing people because I'll say shit like that and then be like, there's no question there.
Yeah, well, I do the same, but it made me think of things when you said that. And I was very concerned with how people can change. I remember we had a teacher in the writing academy, and she believed that people cannot change, and
oh my God.
Well, and that's how she writes her novels, that people really change that much, and I can understand that too, but writing my first novel was an experience of how much a person can change, and that's what I wanted to do in Monsterhuman, not only to tell the reader that the person changes, but to show it in the language. Because well, Virginia Woolf writes about this, how affected we are by illness and how it changes the way we think and also the way we speak and write. And so to be able to show that transformation in the language of the person was, but I don't know if I thought about this in the beginning, or if it was just lucky that it happened to be this way, or if it was something that I saw later on and then was okay. Well, I pretend that it was.
I have a really practical and probably stupid question, but did you write the faster I walk, the smaller I am, then start writing Monster Human and sort of recreate what you were going through at the time that you were writing that, or did you write them concurrently?
Well, the beginning of Monster Human in the basement of my parents, as I call it, my father says that I have to stop calling it the basement because we have the whole ground floor decorated for you, he says, but it's more literally the basement. And it was my mindset at the time, so it felt like a bit. And I kept a journal, so that was sort of the beginning of Monster Human, that journal, and I could, So I had written quite a bit while I was ill, and then used it when I started writing Monster Human.
Yeah. Interesting. Brian, are you gonna ask? I don't want to talk over top of you.
Oh no, I'm just wondering. You're always trying to like guess and figure stuff out. Chat. Did you have any guesses as to who is the French author that went to Romania and became a better writer?
I do.
You know,
Demetrius Sipaneag is the person that I thought it was referring to.
It's about the French. Right?
Well, you talk about how John says, so obviously you know this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's something.
So obviously, John. Yeah, you know that I used to work at Delki Archive. In fact, I think we met, and it reminded me in this book that we may have met before. So there's a question. So when you talk about going to meet English editors,
Chat, don't worry. Chat has a very forgettable face, so don't worry about it. You don't.
So he used to not have a beard, so it's a big difference. So you mentioned going to meet the English editors. Were you part of the Penn World Voices Festival in New York?
Yeah, the Penn Festival. Yes.
And there was a party. There was a breakfast brunch at the Norwegian consulate.
Yes, you were there.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah,
we were there. Yeah. And the second I read that, I was like, holy shit, I was at that event. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, we met before.
Oh, yeah, I remember you. No, you don't remember.
No, but I figured like the second I saw it, I was like, oh my God, it all like locked into place. And it was like, I remember so vividly now, like that moment, because I remember they have such a nice consulate in New York. And I remember they introduced all the authors who were there, and you're all standing in like a line, like up near a stairwell. Like I remember it very clearly. And it occurred to me that was you.
Yeah, that was me. Yeah.
So, but anyways, the thing that Brian's talking about. So when I was at Delki, I know John. So, which is interesting. It's been really funny to see John as a character in here. And I'm sure that he probably will never hear this, but if he heard this, I'm sure he'd be okay with it too. But it's funny to see like you be so honestly describing him in a way that like I think he would be embarrassed by if anyone else were to describe him like honestly in like a way. You do it in the book so beautifully and so like generously, but it's funny to see like someone else like describing, like you say, like I really like when he's sarcastic and things like that. Like, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. I was wondering a bit about what he would think, but he has a good sense of humor, so yeah.
But there's a part where he mentions that an author moves and starts becoming better at writer, and there's two options. It's either Sipaneag reminded me of it, or the other option is that there was Patrick Orednik was a Czech author who moved to France, and And he also seems to fit the same sort of thing, that same idea that he starts to write better in like the new language.
Yeah, no, I had forgotten who, because this was I never read the book. Did I write in the MONSTERHUMAN that I read it? No. Okay.
No.
No.
Ask John if, yeah.
Oh no, it connects really nicely with that idea of language changing you and growing, and I just thought it weaved in perfectly and seamlessly. But it's an unnamed author, and I thought, oh, Chad's gonna like want to know who this is. Yeah, he wants to know who everybody is. So I just like, oh, this is great. I moved right along, and I'm like, oh, Chad's gonna have to Google this and waste a bunch of time on this, and go down a wormhole.
No, that's not true. No, those are my guesses, but regardless.
I have a quick craft question.
Yeah.
So I loved at the very, very, very start, there's these just weird, like random single sentences that just say "but" in the first part of the book, and then at the end, it talks about like having no buts at the end.
Yeah.
Did you have to add in the buts at the beginning to make it fit, or was that you already had that in there, and then at the end you tied it back together?
As I remember it, they came while I was writing it. So because there was always a way of seeing it in another way, and it's also that part of the language just being a bit hard to get into. So I didn't put them in afterwards, as I recall it. I tend to think.
Yeah, because. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, no. I think writing is sort of making a space for thinking, or a place where I can think of things. And then I always tend to think about, but what if, or but if you see it in another way, or So I think they came while I was writing.
That's interesting. It's interesting.
I just love the way it bookended so nicely. I really enjoyed the way, because they stood out as such a neat kind of stylistic choice at the beginning, and then they kind of went away for a while, and then they come back at the end where I forget the character that's giving the writing advice, but it's like don't have any buts or whatever. And so, but that's how it starts, but it doesn't end that way. So that was really, really neat stylistic choice.
Yeah,
I admired quite a bit.
I said this before we started recording, but I love the voice of this book. Like your voice in here is so strong, and it's so funny and refreshing in so many ways. It's really like the thing that I appreciate most about reading this was just being able to go inhabit that consciousness and that way of thinking, and like the flipping back and forth between like
you've never said that. Why are you saying that now? You're just saying that because she's here. Before you were saying, I guess we started it. We'll probably just have to finish it. We'll see how it goes. And then now all of a sudden, because she's here, oh, I love the voice. The voice was so great. It's one of my favorites. But go ahead, Chad. Continue.
Yeah, I have said that several times. The humor is really, I really love. I love the way that like there's little jokes that get in there, and the fact that it vacillates between like the overconfidence and the ability of feeling like on top of everything to like a more crippling, like, oh no, I shouldn't write or I can't write, like that. It feels it is very honest. It feels very honest. And I really appreciated that, just being able to have that voice as part of our reading every week. So that's just a nice thing. The one thing that stood out to me at the end, for the ending, if we're going to talk about that, was that I just finished reading Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon, and I'm a huge Pynchon fan. And so like anything that deals with like the 4 different ends of the universe is sort of it's a little close to home to me, where it's like, yeah, there's these different options. Like everything could just like fade into entropy, or it could rip apart, or it could crunch back together, or like that kind of like multitude of like possibilities in which you're not sure which one is which, or which one's going to win out, was very last night. I was like, yeah, I'm really relating to this at the moment.
Yeah, that was, I had to bring something in because I wasn't able to finish the novel, because it could just go on forever, it felt like. And when you told me earlier that well, you finished yesterday reading, and I just think about the end, and there's still one sentence that I wonder if I should have let out.
Ooh.
And so, yeah, because I repeat myself in the last paragraph there. But you never get to, well, I don't know. You never get the ending that you want.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, and then it says you never get the ending that you want. And I liked it when I wrote it, but now I wonder if I should only have had it in there once. So that's what 7 years
Interesting.
later, I'm still thinking about that sentence, whether it was right.
Yeah, that is, yeah. I mean, I liked it as the duplication, but I can see like where that's like a choice that you could totally keep going back over and over and over.
Yeah.
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 I just realized how cruel that is that we're asking these specific questions about something like, I wrote this like a decade ago, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually open it up to something maybe a little bit more general.
Mhm.
The things that I was really honing in on towards the end of the book, there's this wonderful kind of this versus that of like, do you want to be happy or do you want to be a writer? Or kind of like there's the Darwin versus Dostoevsky, or like life versus literature. Well, you can have kids or you can be a good author. Like which one do you want? You can't have both. And like your character kept struggling with, well, like I'd kind of like to be able to have both.
Yeah.
Is that something that you're still struggling with, or have you found some resolution with that?
Yeah, I think it's connected with the reason I started writing, because it was a way of putting myself in a very different position, because it was unbearable to be where I was. And then so writing became sort of a way to keep the world in balance. And it seemed very scary to me to not write. And because how it was before I started writing was not so good. So then writing the first novel sort of made me addicted to writing in some ways, because I could have just stopped since because then I was tired and I was out in the world, but then I realized everything I wanted to do in literature and how a novel can be anything, and that's why I started writing MONSTERHUMAN. And then I sort of kept people out of the writing room and was always writing. And this is something I'm writing about in my latest novel, The Child, where suddenly I let some people inside the writing room, and yeah, and these kids come, and am I still able to write, or do I have to sacrifice my writing? But so far I have been able to write, and I thought before that writing is that you learn the most about yourself just writing, and there's yeah.
That mean child.
Yeah, there's the child. Hi.
On cue, yeah.
But then you learn a lot from letting people in as well, and you find out new things about yourself. Just both like falling in love, you think that it's about discovering someone else, but then you realize so much about yourself, and not just good things, but awful things as well. And so I think it's good for the writing, actually, to live a bit more. Yeah.
I was going to ask you if you could tell us a bit about The Child, which is your most recent book.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And it is being translated currently by Martin Aiken for Granta in the UK. So people who are listening to this, I don't know when they're bringing it out, but it's in process.
Yeah.
But yeah, could you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah. Well, it is Well, it is this the narrator resembles me in many ways. That she's writing and scared of letting people in, but then one person keeps asking if she wants to have coffee, and after 5 years she says yes, and then well, suddenly he's living in her apartment, and so it's a love story, but it's sort of like it's that difficult, not so things are and then these children are coming along. First one, and she imagines how this will change her mind, change the way she's writing, and she has heard that you're up at night with the kids, and she imagines lying there writing poetry with this new language that but instead she experiences losing language, and all she's able to write is I'm only crying and crying and crying, because you cry a lot in the beginning. Yeah. And then there's this, when the second child comes, she has someone to tell the story to. So yeah, that's it.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, are you working on something new now?
Yes. Yes, I am. Now the narrator is a man who is well, sort of in loves life, but life doesn't give him any love back in some ways. Yeah. So it's shorter, more like my first novel, maybe. Yeah, but I'm still, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't put you on the spot and make you say too much when you're in process of something, but it is interested. It must be interesting too. I mean, given the success that you've had, all the stuff in MonsterHuman dealing with like being a debutante novelist and like being part of that, like that world of like having your first book come out and like all that, and now you're the successful person introducing young authors to the world, or new authors to the world, which must be a fun and different sort of perspective.
Well, I don't feel experienced. Well, I feel like just every time I sit down to write a novel, I have no idea how to do it. It feels I'm like, how do you write a dialogue? It's like it feels so impossible every time, I think. So I feel like a beginner every time something new, and I want to challenge myself and do something that I haven't done before. But in some ways it's easier writing in that I think it's easier to recognize when something is working.
Right.
When I'm honest and not that it's not like forced and constructed, and
right.
So I guess it becomes easier in some ways, but it's still
oh yeah.
Yeah,
I can't imagine. Brian, you can relate to that.
Oh, certainly. I just assume it's going to suck and won't be well received, and so then I just have the freedom, like, well, if it's going to be terrible, I can just do it freely, whatever, no big deal, and then be pleasantly surprised if somebody enjoys it.
Yeah.
I guess that's my my negative way of going about the process. But write without any hope or despair. Just write. There you go.
Yeah. And are you scared of writing bad? Like
me? Oh no, I embrace writing badly. That's just going to happen. So. I was wondering though, you seem to be very flexible with. I mean, your first book being so thin, I think, as you say in here, and then MonsterHuman being fuller, for instance, and then plays or switching to being more fictional versus being more auto-fictional. Is that part of just embracing challenge that you kind of shift writing the writing style, book to book?
Yeah, I think it has to do with what I'm writing about in some way. With my first novel, I think that the person had to be so old because I felt so old at the time, and it became sort of not true. And then with the second one, and I just noticed that it changed the text completely when I used my own name. And I read this sentence by Montaigne. I don't remember if it's in Monsterhuman, but that there's nothing harder and nothing more useful than self-description. And so I just had to figure I think I changed style, and because I had to figure out what it is, sort of. Writing about grief, I found that I got closer to it in poetry in some ways. And so, yeah, I think it's about what I'm writing about.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Did you work with Becky much on the translation of Monsterhuman?
Yeah, she translated the whole thing, and then I read through it and made comments, and yeah, so we had this exchange where we discussed things. Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many like we talked to her last week, and it was interesting to have like all the different things that she remembered, like trying to figure out solutions to, and seeing that, I think bouncing them off of you a little bit, and like coming up with some sort of like the wordplay or the times where you as your character forgets certain or uses the wrong word, and like the sort of puns that come up and like the difficulties of that. So I was sort of curious if you had much involvement in that part of trying to help her come up with good solutions, because it reads really well. The translation is great. Like it feels very direct, very like on the page it's very confident and very clear, which is great.
Thanks to Becky. So yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. But it's always hard with translations, and because it will never be exactly the same, and then to find a way that it's like I say, like it's authentic still.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't want to ask you any specific questions about that because I feel bad now too. But one question I do have. So, in you've written a few different types of books, and we talk about like how you're writing the new book from a male perspective. Are there any things that you've noticed in terms of Norwegian literature as a whole that over the time that since you published your first book to now of different trends that have influenced you, or that seem to be prevalent? That are of interest to Norwegian writers today?
Oh, that's so hard, because in some ways I try to not be too aware of these things.
Yeah.
And just to like have my back against it somehow. But there are some things that's impossible not to notice, like with Knausgård and the whole focus on the autobiographical thing. But these discussions become so claustrophobic in some ways. In Norway, I feel like that, and it's sort of a relief when you are published in other countries and you don't have the same discussions in the same ways over and over again.
Right.
Yeah. So, but trends, and I'm not good at that. Other people would know much than I do.
I was thinking, the Knausgård is kind of what I was thinking of too, because it's interesting. Those books are coming out, obviously came out here in the States and in English so many years after they were written. Like they're then for Norwegian writers and for Norwegian readers, like they're almost old news now. Like that whole thing as a trend of like that sort of like navel gazing Knausgård bit of My Struggle, at least. That's already been, that's been years now. So it's had its impact in a way. So that's why I was kind of curious if there's like the reaction to that. which seems like there's been some of like, we don't have to be like Knausgaard anymore. He's done his thing.
He's done his thing, yeah. But is it true? I heard that it's sort of the opposite in the States, that when someone writes something and calls it autobiographical, that it sort of has to be true, that you have like lawyers checking out whether this really happened, while in Norway it's like a really bad thing if someone can find out that you're writing something that actually did happen.
Yeah, I mean, that shows up in that 6th volume of My Struggle, where there's a lot about like him publishing the first book and like the people from the family being upset and wanting to sue him, and he's discredited their name and all that kind of stuff. I don't think for fiction here in the States there's that much checking up on things. It's hard to libel someone in the States in a book that you say is based on your experience or like somewhat fictionalized. The law sort of protects the artist in a lot of cases. I think in the UK it's a lot easier to get sued for libel and to lose, which makes it a little bit more complicated. But it has been like, I don't know, Brian, you might have a better sense of this. I know that there are like a lot of like people who have started writing more in the autofiction vein, which has been around forever. Like a lot of French female writers were really proponents of this back some time ago and were really spectacular, or are really spectacular writers. And it's sort of like become a different thing. But I know that a lot of American writers have sort of moved into that, both for, I think, I don't know exactly why, but maybe because of the MFA, but also because of identity politics, that writing like a sort of autofiction thing allows you to explore that more often. But I don't think that there's so many people that are afraid of getting in trouble for like including real events. If you do nonfiction, like that becomes much trickier. Like if you're writing a book about Trump, like you better have lawyers that check that out, because you're going to get screwed somehow, or Scientology or whatever. Like there's bad things will happen. But for fiction, I think you can get away with anything.
Like, is there a difference between, say, like autofiction or creative nonfiction or narrative nonfiction? Like, are these just kind of ways of branding a memoir that uses more fictional techniques? That's just open to anybody. I'm confused by it all. Like, I don't care if it reads well. That's interesting. I'm all for it. I don't really care. But I always think back that there's like Joan Didion caught a bunch of shit because maybe it wasn't snowing on the day that she wrote it, but she's like, well, to me it felt like it was snowing, and that's what really matters. So I'm gonna write what it felt like for me at that time, and I think that's kind of beautiful and wonderful. But then there's these people that are like, no, I looked it up, and on September 6th, 1973, it was 72 degrees in that area. There's no way it was raining or whatever. You made that up. Yeah. Okay, whatever. They're kind of missing the whole point. But like, so, I mean, I guess between like something like autofiction or memoir, because I think with memoir, you're trying to be maybe a little bit closer to the truth, whereas narrative, creative nonfiction, like creative comes first, right?
Yeah, and that's what happens, even though the raw material might be your own life and your own experiences. While you're sitting there, right? No, it changes, and literature always will. So if it's better that it's snowing, then it's snowing in the book. So it's harder to write accurate, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't there? I've never read it, but isn't there? There's that book I think there's a book that The Believer came out with not that long ago. That's like the art. It's not called The Art of the Fact, but it's about I think it's John D'Agata wrote an essay for them in which like there are those things that aren't true. Like it was about a real event, but like he changes like the nature of the clothes that this kid was wearing, like when things happen, like move them around. And there's like there's a book that was published of like a long discussion between the fact checker for the essay and between him and like where that rule lies. I forget what it's called. But people listening probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But it seemed to address what you're talking about, Brian, specifically of like, he's like, no, it doesn't matter. This is important. But when it's dealing with, in this instance, it was dealing with like a real like tragedy. And they're like, well, In this case, like you're talking about someone who really did die. Like maybe it's not quite your place to like make that into fiction because it's not about you. And so like maybe there's like some division between that too of like the personal essay, the personal autofiction, the personal nonfiction versus the creative nonfiction about like reality. I was just randomly, not to talk too much, but I was in Amsterdam with Dubravka Greshik, who writes a lot of personal essays that are from her perspective, and they're frequently ones about like her the cleaning person who does her cleaning at her house or like things in her neighborhood. And now that I have seen her neighborhood and been in her house, like I have a different sense of like how much of that is like accurate versus not just sort of invented, or like what she's created is much different than I thought before I got there. I just expected all these like Bulgarian cleaning women to be like in her apartment constantly telling her stories about their lives, but it's not true.
Yeah.
Well, like to circle back to MONSTERHUMAN, it mentions Oprah several times in the book, which I always laugh over. Oprah's funny to me, which I cannot believe she picked it to Ta-Nehisi Coates' book for her book club. Who knew? Was it Water Dancer?
Yep.
But to go back to controversy, that Million Little Pieces book, was that a memoir when it first came out? Because it got torn apart because the fact checking came out and it wasn't true. It wasn't necessarily all true.
So the story that that I've heard, that I think is like the widely reported one, is that initially he sent that out as a novel, and then a particular editor, who I believe was oh God, what's her name? She's super famous. She tried to do the OJ book, the If I Did It book. She was going to publish that. Judith Reagan told him that it won't sell as a work of fiction, but if it were a memoir, people would want to buy it. And so they just rebranded it as a memoir. And then it became so popular that once that lie was already like out there, there's no coming back from it. And so then it was up to like someone to be like, you weren't arrested in like Cleveland or whatever. You were, you never had this dental surgery that you're writing about. Like all these things like came out. But I think it was like initially it was he wrote it as fiction. And then they were like, no, it'd sell better. So it's a little bit more deceitful, I think, than like a mistake, or like, I don't quite remember what day it was or if it was snowing or not. This seemed a little bit more like plotted and like
it's a little more
little gray area.
I'm just wondering, when this book came out, how did publishers, did they just take it as want to kind of push it as a piece of fiction? For MONSTERHUMAN?
Novel, yeah. They put novel on it. And I think of it as a novel. So, yeah. But, yeah, I don't think they use the word autofiction at all. But I use my own name and I use like, real places.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, writing it, I was so scared that I would write something that I couldn't. But then I realized that I had to just forget all about that and just think that I could write anything and change it afterwards. And then I sent it to people so that if they, because I would rather know if they were mad before it was published or after.
Yeah.
Was anyone upset by anything that you said?
Well, people, they are so different. Some were upset if I didn't have their whole name there, or if it wasn't enough about them, and others were upset.
I had one writing instructor tell me, like, don't worry about upsetting people. They're going to be upset if they think they're not in it.
Yeah.
was the advice I got. Oh, okay.
And wasn't it a critic who wrote that you can't, or a writer who said that you can't write about a needle like this one? Or I just happen to have a needle here without a one-eyed man or some one-eyed person being convinced that you're writing about them. So, yeah, it is. And some people are upset if you write about dead people because they can't defend themselves. And then they're upset if you write about people who are still alive because they are still alive. So it's impossible.
You can't please anybody.
No.
Yeah, Ernest Hemingway's estate is going to come after you because I don't think you actually talked to Ernest Hemingway at the bar. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, but most people took it very well, and like my mother, I write a lot about my mother, and she was just worried that my sentences were too long, that people would not.
That's the interactions. The interactions with your parents throughout this are spectacular. Wow.
Yeah. Thanks, Dad. Let's not talk about how I should write anymore. Let's just move on to something else. That was one of my favorite scenes in the book.
Me too. So spectacular. So spectacular. I don't know. I don't have a good question for you. Brian, you ask a question.
I really enjoyed in the book on page 411. I actually so there's kind of like this theme that we've been picking up on about kind of recovering humanity through the process of writing. And there's a wonderful line on 411 that there's this agent that's called Agent Even. And Even says one of the most important. Okay.
I know him.
Yeah.
Okay. Then Even says one of the most important things that anyone has ever said to me about my writing. You would have always written anyway, he says. I hope that you know that, Kjersti, that you would have written anyway. So I'm Kjersti without my illness too. I can write anyway. I have something inside me that is independent of the ME. I really enjoyed that brief moment that your character had there. It's almost like this 400-page pursuit of being something outside themselves and creating something, and the struggle and the confidence, the lack of confidence, and then getting someone to tell like you were meant to be a writer. You always would have been a writer. Any path you would have taken. I don't know. I always like hone in when someone says like, this is the greatest advice, or one of the most important lines someone said to me. For like someone like myself that's just kind of embarking on this type of journey, do you have like writing advice that you like to give to young writers, or something that you like to encourage writers with? Help me. No.
No, I just.
But like, do you have like any kind of nugget that you like to share with people, or encouragement like that you like to give to writers? Because I know we have a lot of young writers or translators that listen to this podcast. I'm just kind of curious what would be your encouragement that you like to give to other writers?
I don't. Well, I will start in MONSTERHUMAN with just what I do with letting the character know in the present what happens in the future. That I sort of had to go. Oh, writing MONSTERHUMAN was hard in some ways, because I had to re-experience things that I went through, and not being able to write, for instance. And with writing it was possible to write it because I knew what would happen. I could go in there and tell Kjersti that, but in 4 years, your editor will let you know that it's now it's done. And so it was so much harder the first, well, when I actually went through it, because I didn't know. But so, well, you talked about Oprah. I'm a sucker for those. Like, you can do it. Just don't give up things, because I needed them really bad at one time. So I tried for 4 years by myself writing this novel, not being able to do it, sent it to publishers and they didn't want it. And so, but I think that if it's important enough, you will keep trying, and eventually you're like, I'm writing about in MONSTERHUMAN about how my engineering studies helped me in the way that I thought that if I just kept trying, my brain would figure it out in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just about keep trying, and but also to read a lot was important, and to become a better reader, to figure out how a novel can work. And with my first novel, I just needed this very small universe because that was all I could handle. So I could have like one person in this apartment, and she could go to the grocery stores sometimes, and then being more confident in my writing and being a better reader, I realized that a novel could be anything, and that's why I started writing Monsterhuman. But I don't know if I have any good advice. It helped just now you telling me again what Evan said, because I had forgotten a bit, and I was like, yeah, that was very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I really like the parts with the whole idea of how your first novel got edited and picked up, and like it feels like it was a very collaborative process in a way that I'm not sure most writers have the experience here anyways. Like I feel like a lot of like my friends that are writers will send off their book, either it just gets rejected, or like it'll get a nice note of like, we like this, but like we couldn't do it in the end, and like that's the end of it. Whereas like your experience in here seems so much more involved and like intellectually interesting to me, to like be like, people be like, okay, yes, this is, you've got something, but maybe, you know, maybe there's something more. I don't know what you don't reference the specific conversations, but it feels like there are conversations happening in which they're giving you different pieces of advice of how to improve it, and you just keep reworking. And I really like that in here, like that feeling of like being able to have someone giving you feedback that's important like that, that's not just dismissive or just like, that's the end of it. And that you just kept at it and like didn't give up and didn't just say like, okay, I'll move on to another book.
Yeah. I thought before that when the editor calls, it means that it's ready to go off to print. But
yeah,
it was 2 years of working with the editor, and it was a long process. And they weren't just thinking about that one book; they were thinking about building a whole authorship and all the next books that would come. So I was very lucky with my editor and my publisher.
and you got like one of the best publishers in all of Norway is publishing your work, which makes a big difference, or is helpful. But I like that too, that it does always seem like in the book, and like you're saying, that it was not just like, here's a book, we're going to try and sell, move on, but like your career is something that they're investing in, that it's going to be all the books that come after this too that are of importance to them.
I felt like they took it very seriously, signing that book, because it didn't mean just that book. It meant all the books that should follow. Yeah.
That's really cool. So when you say as one of your pieces of advice that you should read a lot and or be able to read will help you be a better writer, are there any authors who are the authors that you recommend? Who do you like?
Who do I like? Well, I think the ones that were most important to me when I started becoming a better reader was, well, Beckett and Kafka and s09e10, like big names that I should have read a long time ago, but that I hadn't. And but now today, right now I'm reading Dag Skomsvold, the Norwegian writer, and I think he's brilliant. He's and I'm discovering him for the first time.
Which book of his is your favorite so far?
Singer.
Yes. That's the one I taught in my class, and last spring, because I read a few of them, and I'd read a few before, because there are a couple that came out in English some time ago. But Singer I really liked, so I taught it in my class last spring, and all this the students were sort of baffled by it, I think.
Yeah, that's great that you like that. Yeah.
They're just like, well, there's not like a plot. And I was like, no, the plot is that life is tough. Like, it's like existential, like that you live and things happen and you have to make your way through. And they're like, I don't know, I'm 21.
is impossible, but it makes you laugh. And yeah.
I loved it. I think that book is fantastic.
Yeah, I love it.
Kjersti, Chad, I apologize. I have to go to the airport.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, and I know that you're
won't
going
wait
to
for
be
me any longer.
No worries. Well,
but
and I know that we
have
should.
To tell you, Kjersti, thank you so much. This was such a enjoyable experience for me reading this book, and I took so much inspiration from seeing you overcome so much, and your character overcomes so much in here. And somebody that's like struggling every day to be an artist, this was so inspiring for me. So I appreciate it so much that you were so vulnerable and honest and inspiring with this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you.
And I know that you're going to have to get going too, so we can basically wrap up. We usually end with like a favorite quote, but I'm not going to do that to you because that would be embarrassing to have to pick a favorite line from your book. But I too also want to just reiterate what Brian said, that this is really spectacular, and it's been very fun to be in this world for these weeks and to talk about all the different parts of the book. I went back and reread Faster I Walk Smaller I Am, and I'm really looking forward to reading The Child as soon as Martin finishes translating it, which is great because he's a very, very, very talented translator.
Yes, I know. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Chad.
Oh yeah, thank you. And for anyone listening, you can know that the next season is starting next week. It'll be Ducks Newburyport by Lucy Ellman, which is hopefully a good segue to go from like one character's mind into another character's mind. That's a 1,000-page rant about society and life. So we'll see. We'll be back next week with that. And thank you again for coming on here.
Thank you.